The Keeper of Silent Things. Part 1. The Weight of Dust. The silence in the shop was a physical thing. It had weight and texture, settling over the clutter like a fine grey dust. It was a silence Arthur Pembrooke had cultivated for 40 years, a buffer against the world's relentless noise. He moved through the narrow canyons of his emporium, a place known to the few who knew it at all as Pembroke's Curiosities and Sundries. The name was a formality. It was, and had always been, a repository for lost things. A stuffed albatross with glassy eyes shared a shelf with a collection of porcelain thimbles. A stack of warped 78 RPM records leaned precariously against a ship's brass compass. Books with cracked spines and the smell of forgotten libraries were piled like geological strata on every flat surface. Arthur, a man whose own spine was beginning to curve in sympathy with his oldest books, ran a cloth over the face of a regulator clock that hadn't told time in a decade. He didn't mind. Its purpose, to him, was not to mark the present, but to be a beautiful, silent artifact of the past. The bell above the door jangled, a sound so violent and alien it made Arthur flinch. The silence shattered into 1,000 sharp pieces. A young woman stood silhouetted against the afternoon light, hugging herself as if cold. She had hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes that were scanning the crowded space not with curiosity, but with a kind of desperate hunger. "Can I help you?" Arthur's voice was rusty from disuse. She jumped slightly, as if surprised he was a real person and not part of the inventory. I'm not sure. I'm looking for something specific." "Everything here is specific," Arthur said, not unkindly. "It is all one of a kind. That is the nature of things that are lost and then found." She took a tentative step inside, her boots whispering on the worn wooden floor. "It's not an object." "Not really. I'm looking for a story." Arthur paused his dusting. This was new. People came looking for value, for nostalgia, for a quirky gift. They did not come looking for stories. "This is not a library," he said gently. "I know. My grandfather, he used to talk about this place. He said if you needed to find a thing that wasn't a thing, you came here." His name was Alistair Finch. The name landed in the quiet shop with the force of a thunderclap. Alistair, his oldest friend. The one who had understood the language of silent things. The one who had disappeared into the mist off the Scottish coast 5 years ago, leaving only a half-finished bottle of single malt and an unanswered letter on his desk. Arthur's carefully maintained composure cracked. He looked at the young woman properly for the first time. He saw Alistair in the stubborn set of her jaw, in the keen intelligence of her gaze. "You are Ilara," Arthur said, the memory emerging from the depths. "He called you his little magpie. You always collected shiny things." Her eyes widened, filling with a sudden sheen of tears. "You're Arthur, the Keeper." It was a title Alistair had bestowed upon him in jest that had stuck with a strange seriousness. "What story are you looking for, Ilara Finch?" Arthur asked, his voice softer now. She took a deep breath, pulling a small, faded photograph from her pocket. It showed 2 young men, arms slung around each other's shoulders, standing in front of a vast, crumbling manor house Arthur knew all too well. One was a vibrant, smiling Alistair. The other was a younger, less guarded Arthur himself. "I'm looking for the story of what happened at Blackwood Manor," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The story he never finished. The story he said you helped him bury." The dust motes danced in a sudden beam of light, and for the first time in 40 years, Arthur felt the silence of his shop not as a comfort, but as a tomb. The past, it seemed, had finally come knocking, and it would not be silenced. Chapter 5. The journey to Blackwood was a silent one. Arthur sat in the passenger seat of Ilara's small, defiantly modern car, watching the city bleed into countryside, then into the wild, gore-strewn moors of the Highlands. Each mile was a turn of a key in a lock he had sealed long ago. "He left me a box," Ilara said, finally breaking the hours-long quiet. Her hands were tight on the steering wheel. "It was with his solicitor, to be given to me on my 25th birthday." It contained that photograph, a map of the Blackwood estate, and a key. No note, no explanation, just artifacts, like the things in your shop. Arthur nodded slowly. Alistair was a man who believed the truth was in the things themselves, not in the words used to describe them. He trusted you to understand. But I don't, she cried, frustration finally boiling over. I don't understand any of it. Why was he so obsessed with that place? What were you two doing there? The official report said his boat was found empty. An accident. But it wasn't, was it? The car began its ascent up the single-track road that led to the coast. The air grew colder, damper. The truth of Blackwood is not a simple story, Elara, Arthur said, choosing his words with the care of a man defusing a bomb. It is not one thing, but a collection of moments, decisions, and sensations. It is a haunted place. By ghosts. By memory, Arthur corrected. By the sheer weight of its own history. Some places are like that. They are not neutral. They are listeners. They absorb the joys and sorrows that occur within their boundaries, and after a time they begin to echo. They rounded a final bend, and the manor came into view. Blackwood. It was even more imposing and derelict than in the photograph. A Gothic monstrosity of dark stone, its windows like sightless eyes, shrouded in the perpetual mist that rolled in from the sea. It was a place that had given up on time. Elara brought the car to a stop. The only sound was the wind whipping across the cliffs and the distant, ominous crash of waves against the rocks far below. He was scared at the end, wasn't he? She asked, her voice small. Arthur looked at the formidable structure, feeling the old dread seeping back into his bones. We both were, Elara. Not of anything we saw, but of something we felt. A presence in the house that wasn't a ghost, but a silence. A hungry silence. Alistair called it the listener in the walls. He thought it was learning from us. He thought if we uncovered the house's central secret, the reason for its abandonment, we could break its hold. He turned to her, his face etched with a profound sadness. We were wrong. We woke it up. And on the day he disappeared, Alistair wasn't going out on his boat for pleasure. He was trying to get as far away from land as possible. He thought the silence couldn't cross water. Elara stared at the house, her earlier desperation replaced by a cold, creeping fear. The key in her pocket felt impossibly heavy. And now we're here to finish it, she whispered, not as a question, but as a grim acceptance. Arthur followed her gaze to the dark entrance of Blackwood Manor. No, he said. We are here to finally listen. Chapter 22. The heart of the house was not a room, but a space between walls. Elara's key had not fit any door, but a hidden panel in the library, revealed by pressing on a specific book, a first edition of Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The space was small, windowless, and empty but for a single, simple pedestal. On it sat a large, leather-bound book, its cover blank. This is it, Arthur breathed. The Blackwood log. Not a record of shipping or finances, as the family claimed. Alistair was right. With trembling hands, Elara opened the book. The pages were filled not with lists, but with writing, diary entries from generations of Blackwoods. They read aloud by the light of a single torch, their voices hushed in the oppressive dark. It was a chronicle of guilt. The Blackwood fortune, it turned out, was not built on trade, but on piracy and wrecking, luring ships onto the rocks with false lights and plundering the wreckage. The house was founded on a bedrock of drowned souls. The final entry was from Eleanor Blackwood in 1898. The silence has grown too loud. It feeds on our sin, on the echoes of those terrible screams from the shore. It is no longer just a feeling, it has a will. Demands more. Feeds on sorrow, on secrets. My husband took his own life last night, unable to bear its whispering. I can hear it now, scratching at the door. It wants a story. A final, tragic story to consume. I will deny it. I will leave this house and its cursed legacy. I will break the chain. Let it starve. Arthur looked up, his face pale. She abandoned it. She left the silence here, trapped within these walls, dormant but starving. Until we came. We gave it stories, Ilara realized with horror. Our laughter, our arguments, our fears. Alistair's research. We were feeding it without knowing. A coldness swept through the hidden room, extinguishing the torch. They were plunged into a blackness so absolute it felt solid. And in the darkness they heard it. Not a sound, but the absence of one so profound it became a pressure in their ears. It was the sound of attention. The listener was here with them in the dark, and it was hungry for their final, terrified chapter. Ilara gripped Arthur's arm. The story, she hissed. Eleanor's story. She denied it. She broke the narrative. Understanding dawned on Arthur. The silence fed on tragedy, on completed stories of despair. It couldn't feed on hope, on stories abruptly ended, on lives walked away from. In the suffocating dark, Arthur did not scream. He did not whisper a secret. He did the bravest thing he had ever done. He began to hum. It was a simple, tuneless, fragile sound. A noise that held no story, no sorrow, no fear. Just a human vibration against the void. Ilara joined him, her voice shaky at first, then stronger. They hummed against the silence, a wordless, storyless defiance. The pressure began to recede. The unbearable attention wavered. They were not offering a story. They were offering a blank page. A faint gray light appeared, the crack of the panel door. They stumbled out, back into the library, gasping. The oppressive atmosphere of the house was gone. It was just a cold, empty, ruined building. The silence that remained was just silence. Ordinary. Me. Epilogue. The first light of dawn was breaking over the sea, painting the water in streaks of gold and rose. Arthur and Ilara stood on the cliff edge, looking back at Blackwood Manor, now just a dark shape against a brightening sky. It's over, Ilara said. It wasn't a question. The story is, Arthur agreed. A story only has power if it is told and believed and fed. We have chosen to stop telling this one. They had burned the logbook in the great fireplace, watching the centuries of guilt and sorrow turn to ash. Ilara looked at him. The frantic young woman from the Curiosities shop was gone, replaced by someone quieter, steadier, older. What will you do now? Arthur Pembrooke looked out at the vast, silent, beautiful sea. He thought of Alistair, not with the sharp pain of loss, but with the warm ache of memory. He had kept his friend's silence for too long. I believe, he said, a small smile touching his lips. I will go back to my shop. The silence there is a different kind. It is a gentle one. And I think it is time I started telling a few of its stories. He turned and walked towards the car, leaving the weight of Blackwood behind him. He was, after all, still a keeper. But now he understood. His job was not to bury the silent things, but to learn when to finally give them a voice. Chapter 1. The silence in the shop had changed. It was no longer a dust-laden blanket of forgetfulness, but a listening silence. Arthur Pembroke moved through his familiar canyons of clutter with a new purpose. He had kept his promise. He was telling the stories. He would point to a dented silver pocket watch and tell a customer, "This belonged to a railway conductor on the 7:15 to Edinburgh for 40 years. Never late. The dent is from the day he stopped a fight between two businessmen over a merger." He claimed it was the only time he was ever early. He would gesture to a scrimshaw whale tooth, carved by a homesick sailor from Whitby. He traded it for a pair of boots in Port Arthur. The boots wore out in a year. This has lasted a century. The stories were small, human, and true. They felt good to release into the air. The shop seemed to breathe easier. The bell jangled, but Arthur didn't flinch. He was learning to let the world in small doses. It was Ilara. Her cheeks were flushed from the autumn chill, and she carried a cardboard box that smelled of peat smoke and old stone. "I've been clearing out the last of Grandfather's cottage," she said, heaving the box onto the counter. Most of it was just stuff. But this, I thought you should see this. Arthur peered inside. It was a collection of Alistair's field notes, maps, and oddities he'd collected on his various trips before his obsession with Blackwood. There was a piece of oddly shaped driftwood, a fossilized sea urchin, and a bundle of letters tied with twine. At the very bottom, swaddled in yellowed newspaper, was a small opaque glass jar. It was sealed with a wax stopper, imprinted with a symbol that made Arthur's blood run cold, a stylized eye with a teardrop. "Do you know what this is?" Ilara asked, her voice hushed. Arthur's hand hovered over the jar. He did not touch it. "I have seen its like only once before. In a collector's vault in Prague, a man who specialized in containers. He called it a lacrimarium, a tear catcher. What does it catch tears for?" "Not for mourning," Arthur said, his voice low. According to the Prague collector, these were not Victorian sentimentality. They are far older. The lore says certain powerful emotions, grief, rage, betrayal, can, under the right circumstances, be imbued with a kind of consciousness. Resonance. A lacrimarium was used not to catch the tears, but to trap the emotion itself, to isolate it, to keep it from spreading. He finally picked up the jar. It was cold. Alistair must have found it on one of his digs. He would have been fascinated. He never could leave a silent thing alone. As he held it, a faint high-frequency hum seemed to vibrate through the bones of his hand. It was the sound of a wasp trapped behind glass, a minuscule, furious energy. "It's not empty, is it?" Ilara whispered. Arthur shook his head slowly. "No, something is in there. And the wax is cracking." Chapter 7. The first incident was small. Mrs. Gable from the bakery down the lane, the cheeriest woman Arthur knew, came in to look at the thimbles. She was chatting about her grandson when her eyes fell upon the jar, which Arthur had placed on a high shelf behind the counter, hoping distance would dampen its influence. Her smile vanished. Her face crumpled. "Oh," she said, a small, broken sound. "It's just... some days the loneliness is so very heavy, isn't it?" A tear traced a path through her flour-dusted cheek. She left without buying anything, confused and embarrassed. The second incident was worse. A young couple, clearly in love, were admiring a Art Deco necklace. They were laughing, their hands brushing. The man glanced toward the counter, his gaze passing over the jar. His laughter died. He turned to his partner, his eyes suddenly dark with suspicion. "Who were you talking to on the phone last night?" he asked, his voice tight. "You said it was your mother. I could tell you were lying." Their happy afternoon shattered into a vicious argument right in front of a cabinet of stuffed birds, before the woman stormed out in tears. The emotion in the jar wasn't just contained. It was contagious. It was seeking resonance, seeking to amplify the latent sorrow and paranoia in everyone who came near. "We have to get rid of it," Ilara said that evening after Arthur had closed the shop early. The air still felt thick with the couple's anger. "We should take it out to the countryside and bury it. Or smash it. And release whatever is inside all at once," Arthur countered, peering at the jar through a magnifying glass. The crack in the wax was now a hairline fracture. Imagine that concentration of pure grief unleashed into the world. It could be a psychic poison, affecting an entire town. "So what do? We can't just leave it here to slowly leak misery all over the place." Arthur put the glass down. "We contain it properly." The Prague collector spoke of a specific ritual, a way to transfer a trapped resonance into a more stable, neutral vessel. A vessel that can dissipate the energy safely over centuries. He mentioned a heartstone. I thought it was madness at the time. Now, a heartstone. What is that? Where do we find one? "I don't know," Arthur admitted. "But I believe Alistair might have." He turned to the box of his friend's effects. He was looking for this jar or things like it. He must have been. We need to find his research. We need to understand what he was truly after. They spread the contents of the box on the floor. Maps, notes in Alastair's frantic scrawl, sketches of strange artifacts. Ilara unfolded a large map of the Scottish coast, different from the one of Blackwood. This one was marked with a series of small X's along a remote stretch of coastline near a village called Stormhaven. In the margin, next to one specific X, Alastair had written not a note, but a single desperate sentence that made the room feel cold. Asterisk, he is down there. And he is still weeping. Asterisk. The thing in the jar hummed on its shelf, a little louder now. Had heard them. It knew they were searching. And it seemed pleased. Chapter 19. The cave was not on any tourist map. It was a fissure in the cliff face, revealed only at the lowest tide, hungry-looking and smelling of rotting seaweed. According to Alastair's notes, it was a place the locals called the Sorrow's Maw. Charming, Ilara muttered, shining her torch into the damp darkness. The beam illuminated slick, weeping walls that narrowed as they descended. The notes say the Heartstone is a natural formation deep inside, Arthur said, his voice echoing uncomfortably. A geode of pure quartz, large enough to absorb a significant resonance. Alastair believed ancient peoples used them as spiritual capacitors. They picked their way down, the sound of the crashing waves fading behind them, replaced by the drip of water and their own ragged breathing. The air grew thick and hard to inhale. It felt heavy, not with silence, but with a profound ancient sadness. It was the feeling of a place that had witnessed too much tragedy. Finally, the tunnel opened into a cavern. In the center, glowing with a faint internal light from their torches, was the geode. It was magnificent, taller than Arthur, its interior a forest of flawless, clear crystal teeth. And filled at its base was a skeleton. It was not ancient. The tattered remains of a waxed canvas jacket and sturdy boots still clung to the bones. Clutched in one skeletal hand was a notebook. On a rock beside him sat a rusted canteen and an empty glass jar, its wax seal long since broken. Ilara let out a choked cry. Alastair! He hadn't disappeared at sea. He had come here. He had succeeded in finding the Heartstone. But something had gone terribly wrong. Arthur, his heart a stone in his own chest, gently pried the notebook from his friend's grasp. The last entry was dated the day Alastair had vanished. Asterisk, I have done it. I found the source of the weeping that has haunted this coast for generations. A lacrimarium, the original one, far more powerful than the one I found in the barrow. It contained the grief of an entire village lost to a storm and a plague. I brought it here to transfer it, to finally give it rest. Asterisk. Asterisk, but I was arrogant. The stone is a neutral vessel, but it must be activated. It requires a counter-resonance. A memory of pure, selfless joy to act as a stabilizer, or the grief will simply shatter it. And me, asterisk. Asterisk, I have none left to give. Blackwood took it. The thing in the walls fed on all my light. I have only my sorrow, my fear, my regret. I can hear it now, the grief from the jar, it's free. It's merging with my own. So loud. It's showing me all my failures. Arthur, I'm so sorry. Asterisk. Asterisk, the stone is singing. It's a beautiful song. I think I'll just lie down and listen. Asterisk. Arthur sank to his knees. His friend hadn't been running away. He had been on a final, desperate mission of redemption. He had failed because the battle at Blackwood had left him spiritually bankrupt, with no joy left to fight the darkness. The thing in their jar wasn't the source. It was a smaller, weaker echo Alastair had collected earlier. The main horror was already here. And it had killed him. Ilara was crying silent tears that fell onto the crystal floor. As they did, the entire geode began to hum, resonating with her sadness. From the shadows at the back of the cave, a figure began to form. It was made of mist and memory and the sound of the sea. It was the shape of a man, his face contorted in an agony of loss. It was the weeping ghost of Alastair Finch, trapped forever in the moment of his failure. His own immense grief now the very thing powering the curse. The real horror wasn't in the jar they brought. It was the keeper of this cave. And they had just walked into his tomb. Epilogue. They stood on the cliff top, the wind whipping their hair. In Arthur's hands he held the small jar from the shop. The wax was now fully split. "It's the only way," Elara said, her voice steady though her eyes were red-rimmed. "He wrote it. Needs a counter-resonance. A memory of pure joy." "I have one," Arthur said softly. He looked at the jar. "The day we met, truly met, in the shop, you were so fierce, so determined to find your grandfather. And for the first time in decades I did not feel alone. That feeling, that tiny spark of connection. It was joy, Elara. It was the first joy I'd felt in years." He looked at the weeping cave entrance below. "He needs to hear it. He needs to know his story didn't end in failure. That it led to this." He didn't throw the jar. He simply unstoppered it. For a moment nothing happened. Then a shimmer like heat haze rose from the open mouth of the jar. It didn't look like grief or sorrow. It looked like a fragment of golden light. It hung in the air for a second, then shot like an arrow into the cave mouth below. The humming from the earth stopped. The oppressive weight lifted from the air. The wind sounded like just wind again. They waited but nothing emerged. No ghost, no light, no sound. They had not come to fight. They had come to heal. To provide the missing piece. A week later a package arrived at the shop. It was from Elara. Inside, carefully packed, was the beautiful empty geode from the cave. There was no note. None was needed. Arthur placed it in the center of his shop. It was no longer a capacitor for sorrow, but a monument. A testament to a friend's sacrifice, and to the truth he now held most dear. That some silent things are meant to be kept, but others, the most important ones like love and joy and forgiveness, are meant to be set free. The keeper of silent things understood his purpose at last.